Welcome to Attachment Matters, a series of conversations between two moms who love to nerd out on the subject of attachment. We'll dive into what it is, what it isn't, what it relates to, what it can mean for parenting, and how it can help us explain the current state of things. Rose was introduced to Dr. Gordon Neufeld's attachment-based developmental model when her two sons were very young, and it has significantly shaped her life. She brings a depth of knowledge from the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, having taken a number of courses at the Neufeld Institute. This series offers her the opportunity to share insights from this model with parents who are trying to make sense of their trans-identified children.
As a mom of two teens and a former classroom educator, StoicMom has an intense interest in attachment and development. She's done some serious dabbling into the Neufeld bank of knowledge, but also has a knack for scanning the environment for frameworks to discover where they overlap and where they diverge. In her work supporting parents of trans-identified kids, she's committed to making sense of how we find ourselves grappling with things like gender identity and the other ways that our kids are struggling to find their place in this world. Both of us found ourselves entangled in the world of gender ideology, following very different routes to get here. We share a passion for the attachment framework as a way to understand and fulfill our roles and responsibilities as mothers in these oh-so-strange times.
In this episode, Rose likens the conditions that foster all 6 stages of attachment to a womb that gestates the maturity necessary for true individuation. We introduce the concept and importance of parents taking the alpha role in relationship to our children and how healthy parenting demands that we grow ourselves up. Rose shares more details of her story of estrangement and healing with her own parents, and we encourage finding faith in something larger than ourselves so that we, as parents, can feel held and find rest.
One of the ways I was hoping we would sort of review, or that I could offer a review of what we've covered so far, seeing attachment as the womb of maturation.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the 6-stage model is what we've covered so far, which uses the analogy of the plant, and the deeper the roots, the more the plant can grow. And, by way of review, I thought one of the ways I could talk about it today is seeing that whole process of those roots going deeper and deeper of attachment as really creating sort of an external womb. Once the baby gestates in that womb for 9 months and is born, this process of attachment, those 6 stages, ideally create that womb for growing up, for maturing. Okay. So that's another analogy we could articulate it as.
Yes. That's so interesting to think of it that way, because often like the creative process is also likened to gestation, right? Yes, and birthing something into the world. And so we're kind of talking about human maturity, that this is how it gestates in this womb of attachment. Okay, yeah, that's really, really interesting. And so early on, it might have even been the first episode, we talked about it being never too late to grow up. So I guess in some ways, many of us reach full grown physically, but maybe prematurely when it comes to maturation.
Right. Yes, okay. There are many middle-aged, there's many 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds walking around who may still be kind of like preschoolers.
Okay.
In terms of their actual maturity.
Right. Okay.
And I think that's more common these days than not.
Yes, and I hope that we get to some of that today and why that might be and what's maybe keeping people in that state. So we'll do a quick review of just kind of what we've covered so far. We'll use some stories to reinforce that information. And then you and I talked about doing a Q&A, and that is planned. We thought maybe this episode would be that, but we've decided to have this this episode to kind of just reinforce the concepts we've learned so far and to also tackle something that we knew was going to happen. And that is that your message or Neufeld's message and mine in some ways seem to conflict. And we want to explore that and see whether that's actually the case or if we're just sort of using different terminology or referring to things in different ways.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Let me see if I can name the stages, the 6 stages. So, number 1 is attachment at the senses, right? These are the 5 senses that we use to take in information about our world, and that would make up the first one. I'm not going to go into a lot of explanation about each of these. I just want to see if I can name them. The second is sameness, or being like our caregivers, right? Okay. The third is belonging and loyalty. The fourth is significance, or feeling like we matter to our caregivers. Okay. And then the fifth would be attachment at the heart. Sometimes Neufeld calls this love, right? This is the stage where love, where our children give us their hearts. Okay. And then the sixth would be psychological intimacy. Am I saying that right? Okay. Or being known. That sort of need to confess, maybe, or just to share the deepest parts of ourselves and feeling safe to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I didn't even
Beautiful.
study.
So let me jump in here, and that was a beautiful review. And I'm going to speak to how all of those stages from the Neufeld perspective, provide what he calls the womb for maturation. Okay. And actually, in an ideal
Mm-hmm.
situation,
Mm-hmm.
they actually provide the womb. And when he says the womb for maturation, what he's actually speaking to as one of the aspects of that is the womb for individuation, the womb for the emergence of an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where, maybe I'll speak to this really quick. And then this is maybe a place where we can start to tease apart where it might seem like our perspectives are at conflict.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
might not actually be, but just some of the language around it may
Yes.
give that perception.
Yes. Yes.
So in terms of those 6 stages, providing that womb, when we think about an individual, when we're attached at that first stage of the senses, we can't even be physically separate from one another, right? We have to be in sight, sound, touch, smell. We've talked about kind of that digital, unfortunately, the digital staying in touch kind of can keep us there sometimes at that really first stage, because we can always be in sensory contact via texting or, the online world. We can't really be separate. We can't really be an individual if we have to be physically sensory in touch at all times. So the second stage allows for a little bit of an individual to start to emerge, because you can not have to be physically in touch or sensory in touch. You can be the same as. It gives a little space to be separate. But you can't be different until kind of that third stage, where you can not have to be exactly the same as, but you still have to be on the same side as. And this is actually also where obedience comes in. You still
Mm.
have to obey, to be loyal. So you can have some difference, but you still have to take the side. So if we're thinking of this from the child's perspective, this is what I want you to think about right now, the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of a child. Um, they're starting to be able to have some individual characteristics, but they still have to obey or take the side of, be loyal to. When we get to that fourth stage, now that gives us a little bit more room. We don't always, we can now, not always take the side of, but we can still matter. We can still be significant. However, this is the stage where measuring up to a parent, or if the child is peer oriented, to the peer's expectations comes into play. So, okay, we've gotten a little bit of room for an individual, but we still have to measure up. So what happens if I don't measure up? Am I still going to be loved? Well, that's why the fifth stage ideally is there. Even when I don't measure up, I know I'm still loved. I'm attached at the heart.
So
And
if
then
this is don't measure up or even disagree with, is that correct? Is that kind of part of significance? Is that I can
it,
disagree with you and still matter?
well, I would say that might be even, the sameness and the loyalty. So even the second and third
Right.
stages would be
Yes, yes,
disagreement.
yes. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but if I'm still valued, if I know I still matter to you, even if
Mm-hmm.
we disagree, we still have a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if I don't measure up to your values, that's where the significance, that's where
Okay.
fourth stage kind of is at risk, right? Will we
Mm-hmm.
still be connected even if I don't measure up to what matters to you, to what you value, to what you hold dear? So if I'm different from that, will you still love me?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the attachment at the heart fills that gap.
Okay.
So I don't have to measure up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know you still love me. I know
Mm-hmm.
you're still going to be
Mm-hmm.
there for me. And then that sixth stage is where we can share what's in our hearts. And so you spoke to it perfectly, because it is this idea of being known.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but it sometimes is helpful to think of it in the context of a marriage, or even when attachment becomes um, sexualized in a sense. It's this idea. So I'm taking it out of the parent-child relationship, just to be clear. Think of it as a partner, as a husband or a wife, where you can literally take your clothes off. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
nothing will come between us.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
can share everything with you. And so think of that. Now we're going to take it back over to the other side of the psychological sense of being known. I can tell you I can share my heart, and we can be different. We can disagree. I may not measure up, but our relationship is deep enough that you can still be there.
You and you can see the ugliest parts of me.
Yes,
Kind of using that, taking clothes off
exactly. That
um, aspect.
vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Yes, it's that vulnerability and you've used the term rest often,
Yeah,
which I think is a beautiful way to explain what happens when somebody can know the ugliest parts of you and you know they're not going anywhere.
right. 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 Exactly. And so this is that attachment womb. And the idea is that when we get to, if we, and I say if we
Right.
get to that deepest stage, and if that happens in the context of the child's relationship to adults, whether parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, those hierarchical relationships, that is where they can become an individual, because they can be fully themselves, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak,
Mm-hmm.
while
Mm-hmm.
still maintaining connection to those they are most attached to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is where kind of that potential conflict of language may come in, because what Neufeld argues is that when we talk about adolescence and individuation, we get it wrong, because we think they have to uproot and separate from us in order to become their own people. And while that is true to an extent. It is not that we pull the plant up and remove the roots.
Mm-hmm.
It is that
Mm-hmm.
the deeper the roots go with us, the more space they have to become themselves. Because we are creatures of attachment. We are always going to be seeking these six things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We need it. And so if it's not being fulfilled by the parents, it is likely going to be sought from the peers. And that, by and large, is not going to allow for individual emergence. It's going to be about conformity. It's going to be about those more shallow levels of attachment. I should be the same. I need to be the same as. I need to take the side of. You know, it runs the risk that it's not going to be that deeper development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, this is where I thought might give us some ground for saying where do we conflict or not. But I did want to share that just really transparently that he argues we are getting this wrong. They
Yes.
need us more than ever as adolescents. And the deeper they are attached to us, the more individuation is going to be able to occur.
And so that's kind of what I'm hearing. It's
Mm-hmm.
the term individuation. That is
Mm-hmm.
one aspect of this where we people might hear things a little bit differently. I want to acknowledge that that is what I learned about attachment early on before ever hearing of Neufeld, is that the
Mm,
safer and more secure, more attached the child feels to the caregivers, the more um, safe they feel to explore their individuality. You know,
exactly.
that creates the conditions for them to do just that.
Yep.
Um,
That's that womb. It provides
mhm,
that home base. What he
mhm,
says is we hold on, we continue to give that generous invitation to exist
mhm,
so they can let go.
mhm, mhm. Okay, so they can let go because that's actually where I think listeners might get confused, or my
Yeah,
listeners might get
totally.
confused, is I hear Neufeld often say, like his whole thing is hold on to
Yes.
your kids.
Yes.
And my listeners often hear me say, let go.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, you know, I've tried to really clarify what that means.
Hmm.
That 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 doesn't mean cut off, right? That doesn't mean, and in fact, I might share just a quick quote from my article, How Will You Know, which was
Mm.
a pretty widely read article. But basically, distinguishing between letting go and cutting off, between growing up and giving up, between separating and pushing away, between being caring, supportive, and available versus defended, cold, and dismissive. Because I think what happens in a lot of these families is it's so painful and so hard and requires such endurance that moms end up getting worn down,
Yes.
you know, which is
Yes.
understandable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
um, in there, the between growing up and giving up. I also
Yeah.
want to lift up there that I'm not talking there necessarily about the child growing up, but about us
Mm,
growing ourselves
yeah.
up
Yeah.
to be able to tolerate just how messy and destabilizing the circumstance is.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
The image that comes to mind for me, and I hope to be able to articulate this. At the Neufeld Institute, they have these intensives. Intensive one is all about attachment, maturation, emergence. You know,
Mm-hmm.
intensive two is all about what he calls the separation complex.
Mm,
And it
mm-hmm,
looks at those three primal emotions, separation based emotions. And then he kind of like puts all of these, what we call like mental health diagnoses, overlaying like that. What his argument is that these are all rooted in the complex, multifaceted um, human responses to experiencing separation. We give them different names, we
mm-hmm,
diagnose them, but they, and I'm going to give you a 2-minute summary
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
of the end message that if our child is troubled, if they have, they are in one of those complex, knotted, odious manifestations of one of these experiences of separation, and it's taken on a specific presentation. They're pushing us away. They're in, defensive detachment. We are the enemy. They are broken and they are extremely difficult to be in relation to.
Can we clarify there? The
Yeah.
child is not broken. The attachment is broken.
Yes, but they may be experiencing some kind of, inner fragmentation. And it is, yes, that the relationship is also broken. I'm not saying the child is irreversibly broken or anything like that, but that there may be a lot of complex things that are underneath the surface that are
Mm-hmm,
presenting as behaviors that are extremely difficult
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
for the parent.
Yes.
There's a few different recommendations at the 2-minute summary, but the biggest one is that our invitation to them needs to be bigger.
Mm-hmm,
It needs
mm-hmm,
to be bigger than and I'm going to use the word odious because I don't have a current child that's trans identified, but I have children who have odious behavior sometimes. It's just, it repels us.
okay.
It
Okay.
is just so, it's just, our attachment is affected.
It's a repelling behavior. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
We don't want to
um
hang on.
we just want to push them away because they're pushing
Mm-hmm,
us away.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what you're saying and what I want to say here, that's our growing up because
Yes.
we have to expand
Yes.
our
Yes.
own capacity to embrace them.
Mm-hmm,
And no, maybe I don't totally understand what's underneath this,
mm-hmm,
but I need to be bigger than this.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I need to still find it in me to put a twinkle in my eye, to bridge what might come between, to see that child that's still inside them who needs me.
Yes. So one of my first articles as Stoic Mom, and it was originally published on Pitt, was called Coming Home. And I think I describe this realization that what I needed to do was become the mom my daughter needed me to be, which is different than what I was trying to do before that, I think, and what often we find ourselves doing. And this is why I brought up in our last conversation my why I discourage like judging their experience as wrong, like judging this identity as wrong, because
Mm-hmm.
then we feel like we need to stop that, right? That becomes
Mm-hmm.
our focus. I need to fix this circumstance. And what that looks like is my child is no longer trans identified. And that becomes the focus rather than, as you pointed out, seeing it as um, an alert or a sort of, it's a message, right, from the child that something needs to change, right? Something's not working. We need to look at what needs to evolve in our relationship. You said it a little differently, but I think, that we're basically on the same page there. What is
Yeah.
actually getting communicated here? You know, um, and typically up to this point, moms have been very much managing their children's lives, and so it's a the communication I think can be difficult to interpret because it is asking something different. It's asking mom to do something different than what she's been doing, not to manage, but to evolve the relationship.
Mm,
Maybe,
mm, mm-hmm,
um, and so this is where like the word enmeshment kind of comes to mind for me.
mm,
Um, and I'm not sure if we're at the point where we want to kind of follow this train of thought, but to me, this is where attachment or non-attachment, I think, becomes like non-attachment in that sort of Eastern philosophy sense,
mhm.
does become applicable. And again, sort of back to the difference between letting go and cutting off. It's
Yeah.
not that we are detaching from our child, but it's
Yeah.
that we are reorienting
Yeah.
to the situation and recognizing that this is demanding something different from us and that we
Yeah.
can't be attached to what their experience looks like. We need to grow bigger than the mess and be able
Yes.
to hold that container for this messy circumstance that we are now both moving through, us
Yep.
and the child.
Yeah.
That's what this is, that it's going to reflect to us maybe where we haven't finished maturing so we can do that
Yeah.
and become the mom they need us to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wonder if the maturing happens through the becoming
Yes.
the mom they need us to be. Like that's
Yes.
how we mature because we have we have to become that for them.
I think that is well said. I think very few of us are there until that point in life,
I agree.
until parenthood demands it of us.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is too much of a side track either, but what popped into my head at that moment, and at some point here, I want to tell a little bit more of my story with my parents. But part of that maturing for me, and maybe this is the case for some other moms, maybe some more than others, especially those of us who come from, let's say, a progressive background.
Mm, okay.
Me becoming who I needed to get my own son on the off ramp from a cross sex identification required me to separate from my peers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So, for a lot of moms who are losing friendships,
mm-hmm.
who have come up against the culture, the dominant culture, even, I've read that, Pitt articles so well written about I had to stop listening to NPR. I had to
Yes.
separate from my political party. I had to individuate. We have been very shaped by our own peer orientation as parents and becoming what our child needs us to be in this scenario helps us mature in part because it requires at times individuating from our peers.
Yes, indeed. And like we were just saying, our capacity to do that often I don't think is fully there until we have been in the world a bit, and Carl Jung would say, young adulthood is like this. We are maybe going to be peer oriented, maybe not in the ideal circumstance. I don't know, it's hard to say. This is the world we live in, right? But I think too, a complicating factor here, often I believe what happens is we we jump ship rather than actually um, maturing and developing our own sort of internal compass so we can be solid and stable in that, we find another peer group to orient toward. And that is, I
Mm.
think, what perpetuates maybe the conflict and eventually even can lead to estrangement, if that makes sense. Because
Yes, it
now,
does.
now we're still peer oriented. We've
Yeah.
just jumped into another peer group and and this group says what this other group is doing is wrong.
Yep.
And so we've still got that judgment going on. We're still identifying with the peer group, and that is going to perpetuate, I think, the attachment difficulties between mom and child.
Yes. And I want to say it makes perfect sense that that
Mm-hmm.
dynamic
Mm-hmm.
is there because of everything we've talked about for
Yes.
3 episodes.
Yes.
We are creatures of attachment.
Yes.
We are in alarm.
Yes.
We are seeking to hold on to a compass point, we are without a compass point.
Yes. That's right. The destabilization. Yes. That's what happens. We get destabilized. We lose our compass, and that is a very distressing place to be hanging out. It's crazy making.
Yes. And so it makes perfect sense to seek something else to hold on to.
Absolutely.
And if
Absolutely.
and if it is our peers that we've lost and we find new ones, makes perfect sense. And you are totally right. That does not mean that that new peer group is necessarily in the best interest of our relationship to our child.
Right. Right.
So that is actually what I am going to say needs to be our North Star, our relationship to our child, becoming the parent our child needs.
Okay, I want to address that. Um, and by doing that, I want to say what that does for us is it grows us up.
Correct.
We are accepting the invitation to do our own maturation work, should we choose to do that. Now, if that feels undoable, I also want to acknowledge, and I'm going to be referencing sort of Jungian ideas here, that that is an indicator of a normal, healthy ego that
Mm,
is working to preserve us, right? That is
mm,
self-preservation, and yes, I recognize that it is also the sign of a defended heart.
mm.
Um, and it's not surprising, I think, that many of us are going to feel that is what is necessary, you
Yeah.
know. But I think bringing some consciousness to that, understanding that that's possibly what is, or potentially likely, what is driving that um, I don't want to use the word compulsion, but that
Instinct.
instinct. Yes. Okay. Yes. To protect, right? To protect ourselves is normal.
Yeah, well, it's not even conscious, probably.
Right. Exactly.
Most likely it's unconscious. It's we are wounded,
Yes.
and so our defenses are going to go up. It's
Yes.
just an automatic brain
Yes. Yes.
reaction to
Yes.
wounds too much to bear.
Yes. Indeed. Yes.
And in an
And it
ideal
comes, well, I just want to also say
Mhm.
it come maybe recognize that and then recognize the cost, I guess, of going down that pathway.
Yeah.
It's normal, sign of a healthy ego. It will protect your heart, but it might lose you your child.
Yeah. And I think this is a good place to talk about alpha, to start to talk
Yes.
about alpha.
Yes. Yes. Let's do that.
So, yeah, a couple episodes ago when I had hoped to start to talk about this other angle on attachment. So we've talked about it as a developmental process, as one aspect of it. Now, here's a new aspect to speak to, that attachment is hierarchical.
Mm.
We come with two different sets of attachment instincts: the seeking or the dependent instincts, and the providing, or what Neufeld has coined as the alpha instinct. So we think it's easy to see this in a baby,
Mm-hmm.
a parent, a young child. Though in our culture, we're even kind of losing that a little bit. But if we think about like mammals, where a mother dolphin swims ahead of the baby and creates the slip for the baby to swim within,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this in of itself is kind of a extremely countercultural, and I'm talking like countercultural to like liberal, progressive culture, what has become more and more the dominant culture in the US, to actually see hierarchy as real, embedded in nature, and a very positive thing, a necessary thing.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to do it different and think we can get outside beyond it. But in reality, those are the two attachment instincts. And we're going to find them in peer relationships with our kids, even when we think those relationships are supposed to be horizontal.
Okay, I just also wanted to
Yeah,
kind
jump in.
of well, I think this is also where a lot of the attachment parenting ideas, even
Yeah.
unschooling ideas, and where honestly I feel like I made some mistakes, right,
Mm-hmm.
with in my parenting style. Um, yes, I kind of wanted to acknowledge that sort of aversion to hierarchical that I certainly, recognize in myself, but am also able to see the importance of having confident, strong guides, through
Yeah.
life. We need to be able to trust that mom and dad know what's best for us
Yes.
and will make
Yes.
the difficult decisions for us when we are too young to make them for ourselves.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. And so it gets
Hmm.
kind of back to that idea of a compass point,
Hmm.
right? That we are providing guidance, orientation.
Hmm.
Um, that is the seeking and the providing, that alpha presence. And we could spend many, many episodes just talking about this concept. I want to kind of just
Hmm.
give a
Hmm.
brevity of it right now, but that we are not putting them in the driver's seat. And I just want to acknowledge, just like you did, I did this with my young children.
Hmm.
Um, it is just so pervasive in our culture right now. It's like the parent at the restaurant being like, honey, do you want this or do you want that? You're just asking giving the child way too much responsibility,
Hmm.
way too many choices. That's where we've gone astray, I think, as a culture.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the reason I bring up the alpha in the context of what we were just talking about is that is to give a little more context to when I say what do we need to become for our child, that that expanding our invitation
Hmm.
for them to exist in our presence
Hmm. Hmm.
when they have come to us with a trans identity or other ways they may be pushing us away,
Hmm.
to become big enough to still hold all of them
Hmm. Hmm.
requires us moving into the alpha.
Yes.
If we shrink back and we feel like we are victims and powerless,
Hmm.
treat into maybe those peer relationships, and we aren't going to be the alpha. We aren't going to say, how can I be big enough? How can my heart stretch wider? How can I still see what I love about my child through all of the defenses they've put up around their
Mm-hmm.
hearts towards me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy. Um, it is probably one of the hardest things a parent can ever do in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And on the other side of that work, though, is the maturation we're talking about. Yes.
Yes, it absolutely is.
And it won't just benefit your relationship with your child. It will, you will reorient to life itself
Yes, agreed.
and not be so defended
Yeah,
and dependent on your peer attachments.
yes, yes,
hmm You become your own authority.
yes.
hmm
And the ability to be together while also being an individual. The
hmm
maturation of separateness and togetherness. I have that with my peers now because
hmm
almost all of my former friend group
hmm
I disagree with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just had a friend visit who I love, but we have gone on very different paths since I came out of this belief system. And, you know, I still got to hand down puzzles for her child, that we loved doing when my sons were little. Um, and it's not without a heartache, I think, for both of us.
hmm
But
Being
but
human
I
is
I
full of
wouldn't want it any
heartache.
other way. I wouldn't want it
Yes.
any other way
Yeah.
because I am so glad to be where I am
hmm
now. I would never go back.
hmm Well, and culturally, we have become so defended, this
Yes,
intolerant, this inability to share space with people who disagree with us or have
exactly.
relationships with people even our own family members who disagree with us is speaks to the maturity we were talking about.
Yeah.
That is an indicator that we haven't fully grown up.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I think social media, mass media,
hmm
all of it just drills that in
hmm
so much deeper because it plays upon these attachment instincts.
hmm Well, and there's many places where it seems like we're just taught that that you cut people out
Yeah.
if they make you uncomfortable, just
Yeah.
cut them out.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so I think this is where I want to tell a little bit more of my story, which is,
Yes, please do.
whew, so I want to share more about my estrangement with my parents,
hmm
both because it is just a, a very significant part of my own story, but also for any parent out there who's listening to this who is estranged from their young adult or older child.
Or for whom that might seem imminent, or
Yes.
yes, okay. hmm
So and also I think this gets to, there's so many different threads I could go on. So I also just want to say
hmm
this also kind of gets to something that you have spoken to, which is, okay, we talk about this attachment womb as being ideal. That sounds so beautiful. Well, what's the reality?
Yes. hmm
What is the reality in our culture for this? Most times it's not going to unfold ideally. And
hmm
there are things in the world that our kids are going to hold on to
hmm
that are going to
hmm
pull them apart from us.
hmm That I think that they can't even resist that pull.
No, no. And that's
They,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's my story. That's
Right.
me. And, young, idealistic,
hmm hmm
get into social justice, go to college,
Mm-hmm.
and I still
Mm-hmm.
wanted to share those aspects of myself with my parents. And I did, I tried the best I could. Um, but, I was definitely immature.
Mm-hmm.
I sought out my peer attachments. And from my early 20s, I became kind of emotionally, psychologically estranged from my parents. Now, we still had a relationship, but as I became more political, and that ideology, what I came to see once I left it, once it collapsed, I
Mm-hmm.
could start to understand the role it played for me in my own holding on to just the existential challenge of being alive,
Yes.
needing to have a belief system, and in my own temperament and personality, I needed that a framework, almost that religious like framework
I th- I
to
think
feel
we
safe
all
in the world.
I think
Yeah,
we all do. We all
right.
have a belief system. We all have
Yeah.
a worldview. As humans, that's what we're designed for that. We
Yes.
need that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So social justice, and then like a very, very woke form of social justice,
Uh-huh.
became that for me,
Mm-hmm.
and that became
Mm-hmm.
my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I became my relationship with my parents became more and more challenged. I as a teenager I had rebelled, and I did a lot of drinking, drugs, premarital sex, you name it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but I actually had come closer to my parents and regretted that. So I think I had some maturing, in my right as I went to college. But a lot of that I had to hold on to. I was far away. I had to hold on to my peers. I had to hold on to my burgeoning activism, as my anchor
Mm-hmm.
for the world. And if you fast forward many years later, I moved back to be closer to my parents, nearer to where I was from, and yet I had developed all of my peer relationships around my activism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of had my friend life and then my family life, and they were in conflict with one another. And mhm,
Because that worldview will become a lifestyle,
100%.
like a religion.
Oh, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
It gives you the rules for life. It's that template.
oh
Sorry. Yeah.
yes, and it's
Mm-hmm.
you're morally compelled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was morally compelled to work towards the utopian vision
Mm-hmm.
and all of what came with that. And so I came out in that context, of that belief
Mm-hmm.
system already, which looking back feels complex to me. And it's still something that I'm kind of teasing apart, trying to understand
Mm-hmm.
myself better. Um, and my parents were traditional Catholics.
Can we clarify what you came out as, just so that?
Oh gosh, I don't know if it was like bisexual, lesbian, queer, probably. Probably
Okay.
I was like queer.
Okay. Okay.
The
They're sort
terminology
of
has
more
always seemed a
vague.
little funky.
Yes.
Same-sex attracted. Yeah.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out my sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it was in the context of the social justice framework.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I want to also say, because I think this is something your listeners will appreciate, I also had a relationship to a therapist at that time in my life. And when
Okay, say more about that. What do you mean by a relationship to a therapist?
I had started going to therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I went to therapy, but let's think about this in the context of being known.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You talked about confessionality
Mm-hmm.
as an aspect of that. It is.
Yeah.
And what Neufeld speaks to is that therapists have become our new priests.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
for many
Yes.
of us, young adults, if we go to a therapist, that is where we are known.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, I will absolutely say, just real quickly, finally conceding to a therapist for my daughter. It seemed the least of many bad options, but I know that she became a sort of surrogate mom.
Yes, that's what my therapist was.
Hmm.
She
Hmm.
basically replaced my attachment to my mother,
Hmm. Hmm.
and and really drove a wedge. I think she
Mm.
had very good intentions. My mom is not perfect. There's a
Hmm.
lot that, you know, but looking back, I'm like, oh, she became my primary attachment.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so
Because of that psychological intimacy,
100%.
which is the deepest level from the model.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Hmm.
So, you know, uh, when I came out to my parents, it was terrifying. And I remember that day because I went on a walk with them in the field behind their house. And I, felt like I had to do it. I had to tell them that I thought I was a lesbian. I think I said I'd fall in love with a woman, is how I put
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
And and when I finally said that out loud, I remember my mom stopped and walked away. And my dad said to me, let's keep walking.
Mm.
And I feel like that was how it went, that for a few years, my dad stayed in touch, stayed connected to me, whereas my mom could not
Hmm.
allow for any aspect of this to enter in. And so when I did fall in love with my now wife, I
Hmm.
told my dad, I've found the one,
Hmm.
and we want to have a family, we want to have children. And he had a very hard time, but he kind of held the thread of the relationship. Um,
He held on.
yeah, he held on.
Hmm.
Yep. There was a time, however, in which, my mom said that she could not enter their home. So there was a time when that my partner could not come to their
Oh, I
house.
see. Okay. Okay.
So there was a time about 3 years where we went through our first complete estrangement. And during that time, I did get pregnant. I don't know why I didn't expect to cry.
Mm. Hmm.
And so after my son was born, our first son, we reunited. They wanted to know him, and I said, "Well,
Mm.
you have to accept my wife to
Hmm.
to be in my life," and they did.
Hmm.
It was tenuous, but you can imagine, but it was also wonderful. And during that time, our second son was born,
Hmm.
and and we were in relationship to my parents. My family was back together
Hmm.
for that period of time. Um, we happened to relocate, within, a few years of that. So we were physically separate, but stayed connected. But you can imagine once my belief system kicked in and I believed, that my son could be this true trans, and he came into a cross sex identification and we socially transitioned him. Maybe some of you out there have gotten the script, the letter from your children when they came out
Hmm.
as trans to you. Well, I basically gave that script to my parents, but it was about
Hmm.
my son.
Hmm.
You either, this is my child's true self. You need to educate yourselves, and you either affirm or you can't see him.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we then went through another period of estrangement of almost 4 years.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And so, when my son turned 8 and I was ready, and I can't tell you, first of all, how many letters I wrote to my dad, how many times I talked out loud to him in the car.
Mm. In that 4 year period.
Yeah, just saying to him, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't
Mm.
know. Because I questioned everything constantly, but I
So
couldn't.
something in you knew. something and you
Yeah.
knew this
Oh,
wasn't.
yes. Oh, yes. And you can listen to my past interviews for more of kind of my process psychologically around that. But I had to enforce it. If I question this, it's transphobic. If I question, but I would talk out loud to my dad. I had dreams about my parents. It was a constant.
But they didn't hear from you in those four
No, no,
years.
no, no, no.
Okay.
I mean, we would email, but it was always me with a rigid line,
Okay.
pushing them away, pushing them away. Um,
So there was contact.
Off and on. Yeah,
Okay.
email, text, but no seeing each other in person.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and it was very infrequent.
Okay.
So it wasn't until, and trust me, I could write a book about this. So this is
Mm-hmm.
a cliff notes of the cliff notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when I came out of this belief system, we had already had the conversation with my son. We had already started the process of rolling back social transition. It wasn't until I felt totally solid and I felt like I could maintain the loyalty to my wife, to my partner, to our family system
Mm-hmm.
that I reached out to my dad.
Can you say a little more about that? It wasn't until,
I couldn't be disloyal to my relationship
uh-huh.
with my wife. We Her and I had to be totally on the same page with this decision and this realization that we had made a mistake and that we were
Okay.
going to help lead our son out of it until I could then reach out to my parents because they had been the enemy.
Mm.
They were the enemy. So I couldn't cross those enemy lines
Mm-hmm.
with my heart
Mm.
until it was okay to do so.
Yeah, I have another early article titled "Are You the Enemy?"
Yeah. So I
Would you
remember
say your
texting.
parents were behaving as the enemy, or was this just in your mind?
I think there was a little bit of both.
Okay.
But a lot of it was me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I reached out to my dad. I said, do you have time to talk? And
Mm-hmm.
I will always remember this text message. He said, I will always have time for you.
Mm-hmm. There it is, the generous invitation. Who, who there? I mean, like, who else can give that to them? Who else would give that to a
Nobody.
child?
We are what they have. We
Mhm.
are the ones who can. So I called him and we talked for a long time. And I basically said, you were right. I was wrong. And, you know, but it's
What
true.
it's what is true?
Um, they refused to go along with it. And I had made a mistake, a pretty big mistake. And so I will say, since that time, it's been a huge part of my growing up, a huge part of my healing
Hmm.
to um, to have them welcome me back
Hmm.
with a feast.
Like the prodigal son.
And that feast has been love, it's been embrace, it's been apologies, it's been forgiveness. And both of us, like for the first like year, we couldn't talk without crying.
Hmm.
And my dad would tell me every time I tell someone about you, I just cry. And so,
Soft hearts.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I just want to say for those out there who don't see this even in the realm of possibility, I didn't either. I didn't see it in the realm of possibility. I thought my relationship with my parents was done for life. And that was totally over. And it was not the end of our story.
So many moms, many parents, I think, in my circumstance, which is a little different than yours, fantasize about that moment of hearing their child say, I was wrong. Can I ask how old you were?
44.
Okay.
So about 20 years.
You also said, I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important for listeners to distinguish the different circumstances here. That when we're talking about an adolescent or a young adult
Yeah.
going through an identity crisis, which that is real,
Yeah.
to have some awareness that they were wrong. Um, I don't even know that's accurate in that situation.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? I mean, they might be wrong that they're the opposite sex,
Right.
but the experience that they're having, you know, um, I guess what am I trying to say here?
Right.
Like what
I hear
I'm
what you're saying.
hearing is you're kind of acknowledging a betrayal, maybe. You've said we are their best bet.
Yeah.
And for us to kind of turn away from them
Mm-hmm.
at this point in their life is going to feel like a betrayal to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
regardless of what's happening,
Yeah.
regardless of the choices that they're making.
Yeah.
And this might need some more unpacking, and I don't know that we have time today.
Yeah. 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 It comes back for me. It comes so number one, what hearing you say that, and I want to understand better what is underneath what you're saying. I want to understand more what you're grappling with here. But when just having told this story right now, and I had no idea how I was going to tell it, I was like, I'm just going to dive in, see where it goes. But
Hmm.
what I noticed from my own story is that my dad held the thread when
Hmm.
my mom couldn't. Now, my mom and I have reconnected, and oh boy, it's been just delightful. It's been delightful.
And has she grown up?
In some ways, yes.
Okay.
But I think the fact that my dad held on to the thread for as long as he did
Hmm.
made it possible for me to send that text message.
Hmm. Hmm. He kept the door open. He kept his heart
Yes,
open for
he
you,
did. He did. He did.
which takes maturity.
Yeah. There was one closed heart experience that was probably a little under a year before I reached out with this text. But I came back to him with a soft heart and apologized. And then I think I felt like we had soft hearts with one another again. But in that whole time, I think there was one where where I felt like he had cut the ties. The rest was primarily me.
Okay. Well, and I think it's important to recognize we can always thread the
Yes.
remnants, even if we have taken actions that
Yep.
indicate we've cut the ties, that nothing has to be permanent.
Correct.
There's always opportunity for repair
Yes.
if there are soft, open hearts.
Yes. Yep. So that's my story of grace.
Hmm.
That's my
Hmm.
prodigal daughter story and my story of estrangement. And so I just say that because I want people to know there's hope.
Yeah. Thank you
We
for
have to,
sharing that. And that take,
yeah,
I appreciate the vulnerability that that took.
yeah,
And I think it does give hope. I think parents need to hear that the story continues. I
yes.
think
We
so
are their
many,
forever.
yes,
We
that's
are that
right.
forever relationship, and we need to remind ourselves of that.
And even if there is current estrangement, this is a season,
Yes.
and it's an invitation to grow up.
Yeah. What my parents did is they prayed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I think of like, how can you hold on? Even if your child has estranged themselves from you, they've cut you out, how do you hold them in your heart? And so you're, even if it's a fantasy, you know, even if it
Hmm.
is a fantasy attachment, how do you keep your heart soft? So that's just what I think of, just popped into my head. Is I was thinking to myself, how did my parents do that? Because I'm thinking of, what would I do? Would I hold, when I had to create a fantasy attachment to my son as my son, because I had, you know, seen him as my transgender daughter for 4 years. So I had to kindle that, I had to reconnect to who he was consciously,
Hmm.
to help get him out. That was part of what I did. And so I just was thinking to myself, how did my parents do that towards me? And I realized they prayed for me all the time. And of course, I, was like, whatever, they're telling me they're praying for me again. Okay, I kind of brushed it off, but woo, now do I get it?
Yeah.
Now am I grateful? That's
That's what
how
I
they
had to
held me
do.
present.
Yes, I had to do something similar. Um, I didn't pray, but I had to find faith. I had to find faith in something larger,
Yeah.
faith in the order of things, faith in the blueprint,
Yes.
faith in the attachment mechanisms that
Yeah.
even though it felt like we were separated, and there is still separation, and you and I talked about that. I don't think we'll be able to get into that in this episode about my own story and the separation that is still there between my daughter and me. Um, but I had to find faith in something larger than myself.
Yes. That's how we can be big enough,
Hmm. I think it's
because
necessary.
we have to feel held by
Yes,
something.
that's it. Yes, yes, we have to feel held. And I also just feel the need to like shout out to my mom who knows how to do that. And so I did always feel held. I mean, that gave me strength too, right? Is those deep roots to my family of origin.
Yes. It's huge.
And a lot of families don't have that. A lot of
Yeah.
parents in this situation don't have that. They don't have a
Yeah.
model of that maturity and that capacity
Yeah.
to hang on.
Right.
And I think that's when it starts to look like enmeshment
Yeah.
because now there's a grasping
Yeah.
and an attachment to what it needs to look like rather than that building capacity for all of it. And I
Yes.
know this is complicated and maybe tricky to
Yes.
understand. And this is why we tell the different stories and
Yeah.
try to illustrate what this looks like
Yes.
in real life. And that it's a
Yes.
process, a
Oh gosh.
lifelong process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I love you guys, you all, everyone who's listening can't see us. But when I was talking about the big, getting bigger, I had my arms,
Yes.
open wide. You can't see me, but I have my arms so big, like a huge, generous bear hug. And just now, when you were saying they grasp, your hands were held tight
hmm
together. So just that visual to take that away from this, are we squeezing our hands together? There's no space, there's no room
mm
for our child. We're just squeezing. Or
hmm
are we huge? Are we just expanding bigger than we ever thought we could, to make room for what's going on for them, and to
Yes.
to hold our relationship as our number one priority to them, as best we can,
And if
whether
that,
it's in our hearts silently or
mhm,
in actively,
mhm,
with them in our
mhm.
lives.
And this is where I would encourage, if you don't know how to do that, if that sounds impossible, get support.
Yes, yes,
Get
yes.
support. And this is what we do in the community. This is what we work on in our online community. This is what I work on with my clients.
Yep, we have to
Yeah.
live it.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. This is not just about understanding. This is literally about building capacity. And it is it's not for the faint of heart. Um, but it is about softening the heart, which can be
Yeah,
so, I think it can be a little confusing.
yeah,
But that's what this does. I think it kind of breaks the heart open, or
yeah,
maybe it just breaks open the defenses.
yeah,
And that is the sign of a mature heart.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Holding on and letting go. Yeah. Thank you for listening. We hope you take something of value from our conversation today. Please check out the show notes for additional resources, including a prompt for reflection. We welcome your feedback in the comments and hope you join us for the next episode of Attachment Matters.